I will now hand you over to Tim.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Keith. Thank you for helping organize this. Well, really organizing it. So I'm going to get straight in. I'm Tim. I'm an addict. That means I'm an alcoholic too. I'm also addicted to all sorts of other things, and I've recovered from all sorts of other things. So, hooray, that's a really good thing. My clean date is the 24th of July, 1993. That doesn't automatically mean that I know a great deal, but I've seen a lot over the years. What I'm going to do over the next X weeks, I don't know how many weeks it's going to be. It'll be as many as is necessary. We're going to go through the big book. We're going to go through selected passages. We're going to do this systematically and I hope in a fairly orthodox manner. So we're really going to cover what the big book says and what they intended to mean by it, and not just regurgitate all the things you've ever heard on speaker tapes, because a lot of what one hears, frankly, is not reconcilable with the big book. So we're going to look at what the book actually says, and hopefully that will sweep away a lot of rubbish that one's heard, well-meaning rubbish, but rubbish that one's heard in meetings over the years. Now, we're starting with the physical craving. We've given ourselves 1 week for the physical craving, which sounds a lot, but it's not because it's a big topic. So, our first reading, which is in the chat, I've given it the little title. What does it look like? We'll come to what it is in a minute, but we're going to give a description as presented in the big book. And now, the backstory for those of you that haven't been reading your big book assiduously over the last few days and weeks, Fred. Well, first of all, he's definitely an alcoholic. There is no doubt about that, of the very worst sort. Uh, he's come into contact with members of AA, but he doesn't buy all of the ideas that they presented. So he goes off on his own. He thinks, I'm going to handle this myself. And we pick up the story. He's got a sensational life, has no emotional difficulties or anything like that. So very unlike most of us. And he's had a wonderful day as well. And this is what happens. I went to my hotel and leisurely dressed for dinner. You can read along in the chat. I went to my hotel and leisurely dressed for dinner. As I crossed the threshold of the dining room, the thought came to mind that it would be nice to have a couple of cocktails with dinner. Now, first of all, we're going to cover the mental obsession next week, but let's just note that he didn't go and get the thought. He didn't make the thought. The thought crossed his mind. And this is the first curse of alcoholism, is that when the thought of a drink occurs to me, it's going to do the occurring to me. I don't have to do anything. Boom, it shows up. Now, notice what the thought says. The thought says it would be nice, hypothetical, to have a couple of cocktails with dinner. What's a couple? Two. If you read on in the story, you discover, first of all, that he does indeed have two cocktails with dinner. Secondly, they were nice. Alcoholism does not lie to him, it tells him the truth. It doesn't tell him all of the truth, but it does tell him the truth. So it's no good saying, well, alcoholism tells me lies, and so I need to watch out for the lies. No, you need to watch out for the truth as well. It turns out you don't know what to watch out for. It's going to get you either way. Anyway, but this is the problem. It tells him the truth, and then that was all, nothing more. That was all, nothing more. So it tells him the partial truth. The other truth doesn't show up, and he has no way of accessing it. This is why all of the advice in AA, when you feel like a drink, you roll the tape forward. He doesn't have a tape to roll forward. He doesn't even know that he doesn't have the tape to roll forward. This is the whole problem. It uses, in relation to this chap, the phrase curious mental blank spot. There is a spot in his mind where the rest of the truth should be, but is not. What happens next? Nothing more. I ordered a cocktail and my meal. Notice there is nothing between the thought it would be nice to have a couple of cocktails with dinner, and ordering the cocktail. The thought which comes to him, which he doesn't go and get, it comes to him. The thought comes to him and converts into action. He's not involved in any of this at all. He's already the puppet of alcoholism. He orders a cocktail and my meal. Then I ordered another cocktail. That was the second cocktail promised by the alcoholism. After dinner, you see, he only had two cocktails with dinner, but it doesn't stop there. After dinner, I decided to take a walk. When I returned to the hotel, it struck me. Notice how the thinking is getting more forceful. The first thought is all very nice. The thought came to mind. We get to it now. This thought strikes him that a highball would be fine before going to bed, so I stepped into the bar and had one. I remember having several more that night and plenty next morning. I have a shadowy recollection of being in an airplane bound for New York and of finding a friendly taxicab driver at the landing field instead of my wife. The driver escorted me about for several days. I know little of where I went or what I said and did. Then came the hospital with unbearable mental and physical suffering. So what we're observing here is once the alcoholic, I'm an alcoholic, once the alcoholic's alcoholism is activated by the thought occurring to him and him having no option but to take the first drink, the thought converts into the action. This whole debacle emerges. And he has no agency through any of this. So the nature of the physical craving, the nature of the physical craving is simply this, that when it's activated, off we go. There we go. We're off to the races. Now, this is reasonably well understood in AA and generally and in CA that when you go out for a night out, you're not just going to stop at a couple, it's going to be a whole bunch more that you're going to have. But that, you see, that's not enough. Why am I still in AA and some other fellowships after 32 years? It is not because if I went out, I might have a really bad night and end up being escorted around New York by a taxi cab driver for a few hours. Anyone can handle a few consequences. That's not the real reason. This is part of it. But the problem is that this could turn into a sequence which goes on forever. In the doctor's opinion, it talks about the well-known stages of the spree emerging remorseful the next morning, and then you're doomed to drink again. The little bits of sobriety between drinks are part of the spree. When you've got a slipper in AA, I was a slipper for a number of months in AA. When you've got a slipper in AA, the little bits of sobriety were me just brushing my teeth as I was supposed to in AA in order to get rid of the guilt so I could prepare for the next drink. I wasn't done, even though I was sober in AA for days or weeks or months at various points. I was simply building up vouchers for the next slip. I wasn't committed. Periods of sobriety are part of the spree. Now, the problem, therefore, if I were to drink again, the problem is not the consequences. The problem is the fact that this could literally go on forever. I have got a friend who slipped in 1995. We're now 2025, 30 years later. He's still on the slip. The reason why it's absolutely imperative I don't have the first drink or drug is because that may be the beginning of a debacle which goes on forever. You remember Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Dr. Jekyll devises this potion that turns him turns him into this monster who he wants to turn into in order that he can act out of all of his fantasies and things like that. Uh, Now he gets to a point where he can't turn back anymore. The person I turn into when I have a drink does not want to get sober again. This is the problem. Therefore, my alcoholism must never be activated again. But now this is going to preempt a little bit next week, the discussion of the mental obsession. Little point on the question of the cap on numbers. I know we're at 100 and we're capped. This is recorded so people can listen to it afterwards. We're going to sort that out next week. Since we've hit the cap, we're going to be on a different link, and that link has got up to 500. So we should be good to go at that point. So sorry for anyone that couldn't get on there tonight. Now, let's look at a little bit of a flyer into next week because we need the other half of this to really get the picture. And this is from the doctor's opinion. In this statement, that's the statement by Dr. Silkworth, this great specialist in alcoholism from the early 20th century. In this statement, he confirms what we who have suffered alcoholic torture must believe, that the body of the alcoholic is quite as abnormal as his mind. So there is a mind problem here as well. Fred had years of evidence that he should not drink, and yet he has the first drink. That's going to be covered next week. But here's the point of the doctor's opinion. It did not satisfy us to be told that we could not control our drinking just because we were maladjusted to life, that we're in full flight from reality, or were outright mental defectives. These things were true to some extent, in fact, to a considerable extent with some of us, but we are sure that our bodies were sickened as well. Now, this contains a line which I've gone through with hundreds of sponsees over the years, and I don't think anyone fully understood it first go. Part of the problem with the doctor's opinion is it was written by a doctor, God bless him, but he was a bit on the wordy side, and he was a great doctor, but not a great writer. Now, Bill is also flowery, and Bill is all over the place with this one. So let's spell out what Bill actually means here in the doctor's opinion in plain, good to honest English. It didn't satisfy us to be told blah, blah, blah. Now, the reason he's saying that is because when people looked at my drinking and the huge quantities and the terrible things I did, the question mark hanging over this situation is, why are you doing it? And the three possible reasons that people might give, according to this little passage, are number one, maladjusted to life. So emotionally backward and immature and not coping very well and not having the tools, not having the rule book, all of the things we hear in AA. Just simply not having the skills for living. So I drink. When I drink huge quantities. Maladjusted to life. Sad. Let's just translate that as sad. That we're in full flight from reality. So that's thinking you're a turnip or Napoleon or something. Mad. Or we're outright mental defectives. The phrase outright mental defectives is a historic phrase which used to be used to refer to people with extremely low intelligence, IQ of sort of 70 or 80, so not terribly able to function in everyday society. So the three possible hypotheses for why when I drink buckets and not reasonable amounts is I'm sad, I'm mad, or I'm thick. I wasn't thick. I wasn't mad in the psychotic sense. My behavior was often irrational and extremely unhelpful and certainly antisocial. And I was mentally ill in the sense of anxiety and depression and all sorts of other very, very diagnosable behaviors. But I didn't think I was a turnip. I was perfectly capable of doing ordinary things like crossing the road or making an omelette. I wasn't thick. Now, it might be plausible to say, well, maybe I drink huge quantities because, well, it just treats my inner condition. Frankly, my experience does not bear that out. Have you ever had an evening where you have a few drinks or a few somethings and you're doing really well, and you know that if you double the quantity, you're going to go into a very dark place and get weird and start to rove around, cause trouble with strangers in strange cities? There's a wonderful line from a John Berryman poem, one of the Dream songs. Lurchy and directionless at 3 or 4 in some Asian city. That so describes where I end up and where I knew I was going to end up, being sad or whatever. Like, I was really upset and I had a terrible childhood and blah, blah, blah. And a few drinks are going to cheer you up. But the second bottle of gin does not incrementally improve your mood. It simply doesn't fly. And also, those times when you went to a dark place and you knew that if you carried on, you were not going to go, it wasn't going to become all My Little Pony and My Melody. It wasn't going to become nice. You weren't going to treat the underlying things. In fact, the anxiety, the depression, the darkness, the nihilism were all going to get way worse if you drank more, took more drugs, did whatever else. You're just going round in the circle and you're watching yourself. It doesn't fly. But it also doesn't fly because there are happy people who are alcoholics. It also doesn't fly because there are some tremendously miserable people in the world. If you want to find them, go on LinkedIn or go on Twitter. They're expressing themselves on all sorts of topics the whole time. I don't think they're all alcoholics. There is nothing particularly unhappy about alcoholics. If you drink a lot, it's going to cause a few problems, and that might increase your unhappiness, but it's not the fundamental cause. There are so many different ways to be unhappy, and most unhappy people are not alcoholics or drug addicts. So it didn't satisfy us to be told that I drink buckets because I'm sad, mad, or thick. What else could it be? Is it possible that it is simply the way my body reacts to alcohol? Piece of evidence one. When I was drinking, there were periods of sobriety which punctuated my drinking. And during those periods, I was like, every day, I'm so glad I'm sober. I'm so glad I'm not drinking. I'm so glad I'm not spending shitloads of money every night. I'm so glad I'm not waking up with all the receipts from the cash point machines in my pocket, thinking, my God, I don't even have any money to start with. How am I churning out hundreds of pounds? So glad on a daily basis. I have one drink and I think, why have I deprived myself of this? And I go into a fog which lasts months or years. What causes the switch? The physical act of putting alcohol into my system. And this is an indication that this is a physical phenomenon, not a mental phenomenon. The triggering point is the drink. I had a friend many years ago who was sober, had a drink. The next day he had a drink. Why did he have a drink on the second day? Because he'd physically had the drink the day before. His life hadn't changed over those 2 days. The drink takes the second drink, and the second drink takes the third drink. I take the first drink, the drink takes the second drink, the drink, and that just goes on. When does it stop? It stops when it's good and damn well ready. Is it ever going to be good and damn well ready? I don't know. Good luck. I had a friend who drank after 10 years, and he reported what I just reported with myself. He drank in an airport after 10 years. He'd been sober in AA, had a good time, had an amazing life on a business trip, has a drink. He'd not been doing very much AA for a couple of years, has a drink, and his first thought as it's hitting the system is, how have I lived for 10 years without this? Now, that wasn't a rational response to the fact that, oh, his life suddenly got better because a beer was halfway down his gullet and his life was really shit, and now he suddenly realized it. It is the physical effect of alcohol. It turns me into someone else. And the other thing is this second part of it, there is simply nothing else that explains it. Now, this phenomenon business. A phenomenon is simply something you observe. You don't seek to explain why it's there necessarily, but you simply notice that it is there. And it is the one thing that all alcoholics and addicts have in common is this peculiar effect of overshooting massively once you start, even when it's not in your best interests, which runs against reason, it runs against emotion, it runs against intellect. The only thing left is the body. Let's look at the second part of that reading. I do not hold with those who believe that alcoholism is entirely a problem of mental control. So it is partly a problem of mental control. The mind has to be controlled so that it doesn't take the first drink. But that's not the only thing. I have had many men who had, for example, worked a period of months on some problem or business deal which was to be settled on a certain date favorably to them. They took a drink or so prior to the date, and then the phenomenon of craving at once became paramount to all other interests, so that the important appointment was not met. These men were not drinking to escape. They were drinking to overcome a craving beyond their mental control. And this is the point. So there's an awful lot of dialogue in AA, and I've done it plenty myself. So I'm pointing the finger really at myself here, my past incarnations in AA, of which there have been many. Uh, I tried to explain my drinking with reference to childhood trauma, mental illness, depression, anxiety, bullying, very lurid and unpleasant sexual things, deaths in the family, mental illness in the family, ill treatment by all sorts of people. None of those are an explanation for why, when I drink as much as I do. It's interesting, the examples in the big book, when it gives you poster boy examples, and this is one, Jim is another, Fred is another, certain American businessman is another, the man of 30 is another. Those are people who have all of those other problems stripped out. No mental illness, no physical illness, no practical problems, having a good day. They drink and the physical craving becomes operative. It's got nothing to do with my life, my emotions, my past, my thinking, my beliefs, my attitudes, my values, whether or not I've had psychotherapy, whether or not I've had psychoanalysis. None of those things, none of those things are going to help. They may be valid and valuable and interesting to explain other things in my life, but the physical craving is simply something that happens to me because my body takes over. Now, craving, we need to look at the word craving because it's a bit of a nuisance word. Um, the word craving in the language generally simply means I really, 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 really want something. And you really want it, then you have it and you go, ah, marvelous. And you're done. The physical craving in alcoholism is almost the inverse of that. You can be bumbling along your day, just tootling along, and someone gives you a chocolate at work, and you're thoughtless, and you eat it, and the alcohol in the chocolate hits your system, and you go, "Oh shit! This happened to me about 30 years ago. I'm much more careful now." And within moments, I wanted the box and I wanted a drink. No, I didn't have the box. I didn't have a drink. It wasn't a slip. It was by accident. I prayed and I drank lots of water and I was fine. But the desire followed the consumption. So craving normally is desire, consumption. In alcoholism, it's the other way around. Consumption, desire, and then consumption, desire, consumption, desire, consumption, desire, and you go round. Now, in a regular person, a craving goes like this: craving, consumption, satisfaction, the end. What happens in alcoholism? Consumption, craving, consumption, craving, consumption, there is no end. This is the problem. So the next question, it's almost as though I thought about this in advance. The next question, is there a cure to this? No. That's the short answer. It has never been, by any treatment with which we're familiar, permanently eradicated. The only relief we have to suggest is entire abstinence. That's from the doctor's opinion. And it's put rather more vividly by good old Bill on page 30. We alcoholics are men and women who have lost the ability to control our drinking. Now, that means after the first drink. We know that no real alcoholic ever recovers control after the first drink. All of us felt at times that we were regaining control, but such intervals, usually brief, were inevitably followed by still less control, which led in time to pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. We are convinced to a man that alcoholics of our type are in the grip of a progressive illness. Over any considerable period, we get worse, never better. Now, it's these two elements which are the real curse of alcoholism. As I said right at the top of this, anyone could stand a week of turmoil, torment, throwing things up in the air. You think you can come back from that, and if you could, maybe it would be worth it to blow out the cobwebs. But every single slipper who I've sponsored on the way back from a slip has said that their belief was that if they went out again, they could come back. And that is the thing which leaves the door open. You might be able to, you might not be able to. And just because, and this is the trick, just that alcoholism plays. Just because you've come back before does not mean you're going to be able to come back next time. I'm sure we've all known people in recovery that have they know Sally. Sally has a slip, comes back, has a slip, comes back, has a slip, comes back, has a slip, gone 20 years. Um, I used to do talks at a treatment centre called Capio Nightingale in West London. Very, very good treatment centre. Uh, I'll tell you the difference between a cheap treatment centre paid for by the local authority and an expensive one. At the cheap one, when AA goes in, the inmates have to go to the AA meeting. The expensive one, if there's something good on television, they're allowed to watch their television program instead. So you get half the number of people at the AA meeting. So that's what you're paying for. If you ever end up in treatment and you're paying 30,000 a week, that's what you're paying for. The great luxury of not actually getting any bloody recovery in there because there's something good on the telly, and the staff are too meek to tell them off, saying, you get yourself to that meeting. I tell you, two-thirds of the people in there were usually women who had been between 20 and 30 years sober and had stopped AA and had started drinking again. And after a few years, they ended up in Capio Nightingale and not. And every single one of them, we did our best to 12 step them. I never saw one of them in a meeting afterwards. It's very, very difficult to get back. And a friend of mine drank a few years ago, and we had to watch the decline over a period of months and a couple of years. He wanted to stop. We wanted to help him. His efforts and our efforts, alcoholism just sat there laughing. So if you start again, good luck, which is why the rest of the program is necessary to stop us having the first drink. Next point, and this is the story which illustrates this point. Let me have a look there. There we go. Just a moment. Yes, so this is on pages 32, 33. A man of 30 was doing a great deal of spree drinking. He was very nervous in the morning after these bouts and quieted himself with more liquor. He was ambitious to succeed in business, but saw that he would get nowhere if he drank at all. Once he started, he had no control whatever. So that's alcoholic. And he's having problems and he keeps returning to the problem. A very good uh, rule of thumb on what is an addiction: a persistent return to a destructive pattern. And that's great because it covers everything. It covers alcoholism, drug addiction, all the process addictions, a persistent return to a destructive pattern. He's definitely got a persistent return to a destructive pattern. Now, he made up his mind that until he had been successful in business and had retired, he would not touch another drop. An exceptional man, he remained bone dry for 25 years and retired at the age of 55 after a successful and happy business career. So this is someone who exceptionally was able to put the plug in the jug and keep it there. But then look what happens. Then he fell victim to a belief which practically every alcoholic has. That his long period of sobriety and self-discipline had qualified him to drink as other men. Out came his carpet slippers and a bottle. In 2 months, he was in hospital, puzzled and humiliated. He tried to regulate his drinking for a while, making several trips to the hospital meantime. Then, gathering all his forces, he attempted to stop altogether and found he could not. Every means of solving his problem which money could buy was at his disposal. Every attempt failed. Though a robust man at retirement, he went to pieces quickly and was dead within 4 years. So you see, the stakes are extremely high here. Just because one has succeeded before in AA doesn't mean that one has another chance. This is what people mean when they say, um, I've got another drink in me, but I don't necessarily have another recovery in me. Um, let's see if there's anything else in that passage. Notice that he has an attempt to regulate which fails. He has an attempt to stop which fails. And the aggregate efforts of the medical profession with his backing, that's the thing. People sometimes say when someone is slipping, slip, 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 slip. Oh, they just don't want it enough. Well, maybe that is the case, but maybe they're suffering from alcoholism and they're still under its influence and it hasn't let go. And that's the really frightening thing. He wanted to stop. People wanted to help him. Those two together were insufficient. Uh, the best image I've ever come across for this came to me from a film I saw many years ago. I've never worked out what the film was. It was set in Russia around revolutionary times. It was probably something to do with the Romanovs or Rasputin or something. Um, but Icy River, I think it's St. Petersburg, so probably the Neva, if you like these details. Iced over river, and there's a hole in the ice. Someone falls through the ice, and there is a current underneath, and they immediately start getting sucked by the current, by the water under the ice, and someone is running over the top of the ice, and the person is being sucked along by the current, and the two are keeping pace. The person running over the top is keeping pace with the person underneath. But imagine being under the ice. He was trying to claw at the ice to get a finger hold, but of course it's slippery. There's no finger hold, and eventually the current carries him away. So just because someone comes back from a slip doesn't mean the disease has let go. And you're talking to them and they're talking to you, but maybe you're talking to each other through 10 inches of thick ice, and there is no way to break the ice. The period of sobriety, assuming that all of you here today are sober and clean and all of the other things, if you're in a period of sobriety, if you're in a period of being clean, hold on to it because this may be the last one. People spare a moment in meetings sometimes for people who are in their first days of recovery. I think one should spare a thought for those who might be in their last days of recovery because they're about to have a drink. And it should be noted whenever you come across people who drink again, almost invariably, when you talk to them and when you've listened to them in meetings every day, let's say for a week before the slip, they went to a meeting, they said, glad to be sober, glad to be sober, glad to be sober, glad to be sober, glad to be sober. Being glad to be sober doesn't mean the disease is not active. It doesn't care that you're glad to be sober. So that's why a period of sobriety, if you're in one, must be protected as though it is the last, because it may well be. One further point on substances. In my observation from my acquaintance, the people I know, the cases of people in AA going out on alcohol being the first substance are very rare. It's almost always a sequence of substances which leads to it. The two entry points that I see more than anything are Sudafed, which is not a slip, but it's fun. It picks you up just a tiny little bit more than it ought to. I've known a number of people, it started with Sudafed, and as I don't have it anymore, I don't want to take the risk. So there's not, I don't think Sudafed is a slip, but people have noticed that if you've got jet lag, it's really helpful for pepping you up on business trips. They noticed this. And what it started to establish was the notion that it's legitimate to solve a living problem with a chemical. And as soon as that happens, it starts to open the door to other substances. And my brain, there is no way of telling my physical brain whether something was prescribed or bought from Kevin off the estate. It just knows that something nice has been added to the mix and it's going to want more. The other entry point, the common entry point is codeine-based painkillers, usually over the counter, but sometimes prescribed. Um, I'm not going to get into a thing about medication and prescription, and I can't be bothered. That's for another discussion. Um, but I had migraines, I don't know, 25 years ago, and I was completely incapacitated. And for a very brief period, I I was prescribed a codeine-based painkiller. And I think for 3 or 4 days I took it, and I tell you, the weakening of the resistance against the notion of drinking, it scared the bejesus out of me. And it also made me really sick, so I stopped. And I just put up with the pain, and eventually I acclimatized to the place I was living. It was the climate and so on that was causing the migraines. Anyway, um, of course, anyone's decision about medication, that's up to them. But what I notice is that I'm just incredibly slippery, and I have to be careful about all sorts of other behaviors as well. If it lights up the same bit of the brain that alcohol and other substances lit up, beware, because it weakens the resistance. It opens the door. Um, is there anything else to be said about the physical craving? I don't think so. I think that's basically it. So now we're going to open up for any questions. Oh, actually, no, there's one little thing. So we need to segue into next week. And so we've got this last little reading. So, what's the solution? This is from page 23. We're equally positive that once he, the alcoholic, takes any alcohol whatever into his system, something happens both in the bodily and the mental sense, which makes it virtually impossible for him to stop. The experience of any alcoholic will abundantly confirm this. These observations would be academic and pointless if our friend never took the first drink, thereby setting the terrible cycle in motion. Therefore, the main problem of the alcoholic centers in his mind rather than in his body. Now, we've got two problems, therefore, in alcoholism. It's two, not three. Alcoholism is twofold. There are two elements only: the mind, which takes me to the drink, which takes me to the next drink. The mental obsession is the technical term for the first. The physical craving is the technical term for the second. I'm going to touch upon what the spiritual malady is in just a moment for those of you who are jumping out of your seats. But to go back to these 2 points, we've got two problems. We cannot do anything about the physical aspect of this other than get ourselves detoxed. Uh, and sometimes that has to be a very long detox. If it's benzos, it can be months before it's sufficiently out of the system for all of the temptation, all the cravings to go. Other substances as well, that's the case. Alcohol is much quicker. You detox and then you pray to God that it never gets reactivated. So the solution in AA is to treat the mind stone cold sober. That is where the work is to take place. Now, it is certainly the case that sobriety, recovery, going to lots of meetings, Eckhart Tolle, whatever else, they're really good. They reduce the likelihood, the frequency, and the intensity of desires to drink or use, but they won't eliminate it completely. Good luck. If you think you're going to go the rest of your life and you're never going to be tempted, good luck. There are some lucky individuals that never get tempted, but in my experience, they're a minority. I notice funny little temptations the whole time, partly because I'm not just alcohol and drugs, but I'm process addictions too. So food, sex, other regular everyday stuff is problematic for me. So, and I feel the tug of the addiction, but it doesn't convert into action. And that is the point at which AA comes into its own, or CA, or whatever else A comes into its own. It is there to stop the thought converting into an action. How does it do that? Not by making me sensible, not by making me think through the notion of a drink rationally, not by rolling the tape forward, not by remembering my last drunk as the book Living Sober would have me do, but by erecting a defense which makes it viscerally, physically impossible. At an emotional, fundamental level, it is impossible for me in a fit spiritual condition to drink. That is what it does. It takes me offline as the chief authority in my life. My action is not up to me. You turn your will and life over to God, and God help you because He'll take it. And that's what this is all about. One point about, and I'm going to credit good old Father Tom for this, is the gorilla analogy. So the way he expresses the physical craving is really the best. He says alcoholism is a lot like dancing with a gorilla. You're not done dancing until the gorilla is done dancing. Except in the original story, they didn't say dancing, they said dating. Except in the original story, they didn't say dating. The gorilla is going to have his way with you. And no one can get between you and the gorilla. If the Al-Anon tries to get between the alcoholic and the gorilla, the alcoholism, the Al-Anon will get their arms and legs yanked off, and not just by the alcoholism. It cannot be stopped. What Tom goes on to say is, if you discover the gorilla has let go, run as fast as you can from the cage. And how do you do that? Go to AA, go to CA, go to whatever AA, whatever A has the correct rallying point for the addiction that is eating your lunch right now. It kind of doesn't matter what the entry point is. Go to the fellowship where there's the common rallying point, was when we need that for step 2 later on, and just do what they say. That's what I did. I'm going to open this up for questions now. Hopefully there'll be some. I think you get to put your hands up, or you can put questions in the chatty chat, and then I think Keith will invite people to unmute if they care to. So any questions, anyone? So,
Oh yeah.
Keith, do you want? Yeah, there you go.
Oh sorry. Yeah. Obviously, you said those about the twofold illness. Obviously, we hear a lot about the
Oh
threefold.
yeah.
You said you explain about the spiritual malady. Could you explain what
Oh
you
yeah,
meant there,
yeah.
please?
Very good. Okay. Now, I don't really don't want to create a great schism in any 12-step fellowship and cause any problems here. But what I'm interested in is not the great orthodoxy of what the fellowships say, but what the book says. And when you get to page 44 of the book, it says, we've told you a few things about alcoholism, and here's what it is in case you missed it. If when you drink too much, and or when you try and stop altogether, you can't, boom, you're alcoholic. No mention of spiritual malady. Um, in the 12 and 12, 20 years later, uh, Bill W. had the opportunity to correct it. Let's say he got it wrong. Just forgot to mention the spiritual malady as being an element of alcoholism. He could have corrected it, but he again talks about the uh, double-edged sword, not triple-edged sword. The insane decision, so-called decision to have a drink, and then the insane continuance after that point. Um, so those are the two elements. Now, the poster boys as well are people who don't have any of the emotional problems or difficulties in life which people usually list under the heading of spiritual malady. So when people talk about the spiritual malady, people usually talk about unhappiness and depression, anxiety, they talk about the bedevilments actually on page 52. But that doesn't say spiritual malady there. That says human problems. They're just regular human problems. Those problems are worse. If you've been drinking a bottle of gin every day for 10 years, you're probably going to have them worse than other people. But those are regular human problems. Difficulty relating to other people, difficulty making a living, sadness, frustration, futility. That's just part of the human condition. And our poster boys, if the spiritual malady, as is understood and commonly talked about from the podium, if the spiritual malady is that unhappiness and the inability to cope and the emotional immaturity and the reactivity and all of those things, if that's the spiritual malady, then our four poster boys, Jim, Fred, certain American businessman, and man of 30, they're not alcoholic because they don't have that. They're fine. Fred is amazing, yet he is alcoholic. Now, the spiritual malady is involved, and it doesn't come in until step 4, where it talks about this malady. When the spiritual malady clears up, then we straighten out mentally and we straighten out physically. So it's absolutely key, but we've got to understand what the spiritual malady is, and we've got to understand what role it has in relation to alcoholism. And I'm going to do those backwards. I don't know if anyone else who grew up in the 1970s remembers a disaster movie. They were always my favorite, called The Cassandra Crossing, which was about this runaway train with plague on it or something. Anyway, typical. But this runaway train, which was heading towards a some sort of canyon or valley with a bridge over it, where the bridge was broken. And that's alcoholism, a runaway train which is heading into a gully, into a ravine. Now, the inability to stop drinking, that's my active alcoholism. And what it's combined with is the fact that the brakes on the train aren't working. So there is nothing I can do to stop it. Now, on this imaginary train, of active alcoholism. There's a great big red handle which says, "Pull this here," and then you'll stop the train. And it says this is the great big sort of red God handle. And you think, well, that's very good. I'm going to pull the great big red handle, the train will stop, and we're going to be good to go. Except there's a thick sheet of glass between me and the red handle, and I can't pull it. So you look for the hammer to break the glass, to get to the handle, to to activate the God brakes on the runaway train. And the hammer is behind the glass as well. It's a terrible design. Now, as an alcoholic, that glass is the spiritual malady. What is the spiritual malady? It may or may not manifest in emotional problems, practical problems, all sorts of other shit. It may or may not manifest in that. There are plenty of people who are very spiritual but have a lot of emotional and practical problems. Just because that's part of the curriculum of life. What is the spiritual malady? It is this. It is my insistence that no one can tell me what to do, that I'm the master of my own destiny, that I'm in charge of my life, that I'm going to decide all by myself how to live, what to do, and everything. It's me on the throne as master of my own little universe. That's the spiritual malady. It's a misalignment with God. Now, you can be like that and be a basket case. You can be like that and be highly functional. There are lots of very successful, rich, famous people in the world who are like that and have found a way of making a go of it in the material world. It doesn't necessarily produce unhappiness, at least not straight away. It's a misalignment with God. When that misalignment, when God is back in the throne and I'm in my true position as servant of God, I can pull the red handle, the God brake is activated, the runaway train is stopped. Now, note, I remain on the runaway train forever. It is now stopped. If it ever goes again, it's going to head towards the same ravine. So that brake needs to stay activated, which is why I need a relationship with God for the rest of my life. So the spiritual malady is absolutely key, but it is not a component of alcoholism. It's it's the thing which is preventing me from getting to the solution. Because out in the world, there are billions of people with a spiritual malady. It's not peculiar to alcoholism. It kind of comes, it's part of the deal. The thing about the glass and the hammer, the reason AA works, I can't smash my own um, glass. I can't get rid of my own spiritual malady. But with the help of other alcoholics, they've been freed. They've got the defense against drinking. They've pulled the red lever and they've got to the hammer. And with their hammer, they can smash my spiritual malady. And then I can get the hammer, and with my hammer, I can help smash other people's. But you can't smash your own. We need each other. Um, I'm going to come to Tar in just a moment. The questions in the chat. Is it okay, Keith, if we go over 5 minutes or so if necessary to make sure the questions are covered?
No problem.
Okay, very good. Okay, so do process addictions work the same way as alcohol in the physical sense, like with the drinking the next drink? My experience with food and sex, yes. Even more powerful with sex addiction than with alcohol. It's I think it's up there with some of the other drugs. With now with Al-Anons, sometimes people try to map. We could do a whole session on Al-Anon step one. Maybe that's another series at some point. Sometimes people try to map the physical craving plus mental obsession pairing onto every other problem, and they try to do it too strictly and rigidly, and it starts to break down. And even with certain drugs, it starts to break down. Heroin addict friends of mine said, "Well, it doesn't quite work like that with the physical craving. It's just different. It has its own dynamics." And particularly with the Al-Anon stuff, I think it's dangerous to try and over map the AA paradigm. Once you get past step one, it's pretty much all the same. And then you get to step 12, and there's some other quirky things that go on which are different about how to sponsor people. Pill people have to sponsor pill people. If you're not a pill person, you won't spot some of the devious behaviors, and pill people can spot when other pill people are because it's the devious one. It's the addiction for people that want to pass as not looking like drug addicts. It's got so much more going on in it. So there's differences in 1 and 12. Um, so one tries to apply the big book stuff to other process addictions, but don't push it. Don't make it artificial. The point of the imagery from the big book and the stories is they have value only in as far as they actually help you understand and explain what is going on. But it's your experience which is the primary thing. That's the really important thing. Um, Someone said you mentioned Sudafed and codeine medicine for alcoholics. Would 0% drinks be considered in that group? Was the famous thing that non-alcoholic beer is for non-alcoholics. Uh, why would I want to drink? You see, this is the interesting thing. Why would I want to drink something which looks like alcohol but isn't? What an insult to my history that would be to go dance around the room with a 0% bit. What would I be playing at there? There's plenty else. Lots of things which say they're 0% aren't quite 0%, so you need to watch it. Um, I'm going to come to the question about if they don't believe in God in a moment. Tar, could you come in? I think, Keith, you may have to do some. There we go.
Thanks, Tim. I'm just wanting to talk also about the process addictions or secondary addictions and the way you say they light up the brain in the same way. And does that not then trigger the disease? And I'm a little bit caught between, do I need to be abstinent from every problematic behavior in order to maintain long-term recovery, or people saying, go easy on yourself, don't worry about, the sugar and whatever, for now till you, yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
You put
With
everything
food in
down? Yeah.
particular, with food and sex in particular, my experience and observation from talking to a lot of people over the years is that people arrive at different solutions. For some people, the only way to maintain absolute sobriety with alcohol and drugs is to maintain sobriety with sugar and with sex and with some other things too. If one goes, the whole castle collapses. With other people, sanity is a degree of moderation with the food. So you don't ban certain food groups, you learn how to eat moderately. I know it's heresy in some food fellowships, but I know people who've been absolutely out of control with food, either as anorexics or as bulimics or as some combination, or have had problems with food. Some people have to be incredibly strict, weighing everything forever, and that's their solution. Other people, it's a restoration to something else. Only God knows the answer, I think, for those things. The danger is trying to map my experience onto someone else's. It might work, it might not. And I've gone through different phases thinking what the solution is, even for me. So let alone anyone else. Couple of other questions here. Selfishness and self-centeredness, the spiritual malady. Yes, chiefly, I think that is it. So all the stuff on 60 to 62 is not about emotional unhappiness. It is about trying to be in control when one should be a player acting as the director. So I think that's close to the spiritual malady. Um, what are they talking about in the first step in the 12 and 12, where it talks about complete defeat, warped mind, and an unmanageable life? Very glad you mentioned the unmanageability. Right. Um, the 12 and 12 explains unmanageability. So um, the theory, which was doing the rounds when I got sober, in meetings generally was your step one is first half, you're in a terrible, terrible state with alcohol, awful. And then you forget that second half, your life is unmanageable. So basically, people were encouraged to say, my life is shit. I'm an alcoholic, first part of step one, and my life is shit, second part. And people saying, you know what? My life's actually okay. And I've known people who are 6 weeks sober, um, and are more competent and emotionally mature than people I know who are 20 or 30 years sober with perfectly orderly lives, but they are alcoholic and they have a spiritual malady and they need to be sorted out. But their lives are actually in very, very good order. So unmanageability, you'll note in the big book, it comes for the first time on page 59. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol, dash that our lives had become unmanageable. The dash in English is not, as Joe and Charlie says, end of one thought, beginning of a new thought. It's a way of relating two thoughts which are logically connected. I do actually teach punctuation for a living. I mean, it's not the only thing I do, but it's one of the things I do. It's one thing I am actually qualified to talk about. So the dash is indicating that the two halves of step one are not two utterly unrelated ideas, like forget one and examine an entirely new topic. That's not it. Those being two separate sentences, with an additionally or a furthermore, but it's not. It's a dash. It's got a very specific meaning. If you said I'm diabetic, dash, my blood sugar is unmanageable. The second is the consequence of the first. If I cannot choose whether or not I have a drink, if when I drink I cannot choose how much I drink and then what I do, I am not in charge of the course of my life. Alcoholism is in charge of the course of my life. If it wakes up and says, let's drink, all plans are off. I'm going to do what it says. Now, step one is badly worded on page 59. Our lives have become unmanageable, as though our lives out there have some quality of unmanageability. And this puts people on the wrong track. Now, the book corrects it on the next page, but the correction is never noticed. It says the ABC's three pertinent ideas. The first one of those is that we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives. That's the first pertinent idea, not pair of ideas. It is a single idea. Being alcoholic means I cannot manage my life. So unmanageability, it's not a description of my life, it's a description of my inability to manage it. It's a statement about me. It's a statement about the fact that because when I'm drinking, I'm off drinking for many hours a day and doing crazy things, causing trouble and making myself so ill I can't function the next day. I cannot take all of the necessary actions to keep my life in order, and I can't show up where I'm supposed to show up in the state I'm supposed to show up in. That's what it means. Now, this got so wholly misunderstood in the first 20 years of AA. Bill attempted to correct it in the 12 and 12 and failed. He expressed it very well, but the message has just not got through to the fellowship. What it talks about is how do people who've got two cars in the garage and have a job and things are going pretty well externally, how do they admit that their lives have become unmanageable? And it says, going through our own drinking histories, we realized that our drinking many years before the onset of real difficulties was no mere habit. It was indeed the beginning of a fatal progression. And so the unmanageability, what it really means is you're locked into a pattern that you can't spring yourself from. The point of the progression you've reached is completely irrelevant. It's just like with the wonderful thing pregnancy and the terrible thing of cancer. If you're a little bit pregnant, the destination is certain if nothing happens to divert you from the path. The same with cancer. The end point is known. The difference between someone at an early stage and a late stage is quantitative, not qualitative. They have the same thing, it just hasn't progressed as far in a positive sense in pregnancy, in a negative sense in cancer. And with alcoholism, it's the same. The horror of the rock bottom is this raising the rock bottom is not to say, oh, you should be just as unhappy about the small things going on in your life as I am about the terrible things going on in mine. That's not it at all. It's realizing, oh my God, I'm not in charge of this. I'm trapped in a process that is in charge of me. And it hasn't yet manifested in all of these external things, but those are inevitable. That's what they mean with the yets. They're inevitable. I'm on the path and I need to be sprung from the trap. So the rock bottom is the admission of unmanageability, which is the recognition that you're as fucked as anyone else, regardless of whether or not it's showing. The test is positive, even though there's no lump. Last little question, I think we're probably done then. Can someone stay clean and sober long term if they don't believe in God? With most difficult questions, the problem lies in the question. We're going to cover this in step 2 much later on, but here's the potted version, which might serve for a few days until we get to the step 2. What is God? It is a power greater than myself. What is a power greater than myself? In the world, there is plenty of encouragement and there is plenty of information. Step 2 talks about 2 commodities that we get from God: direction and strength. That's knowledge and power. Is it possible to stay clean and sober? Rejecting all information from outside my own brain, rejecting all love, support, help, and encouragement from outside my own brain. No. I cannot stay sober. I must be open to information from the outside, wisdom from the outside, experience from the outside, encouragement, love, support, all sorts of things from the outside. Those in aggregate are greater than I am. The power of the other people to affect my life positively is greater than the power I can summon myself. God is the code word for that. Unless you're a trained theologian, don't go any further with the word God unless you until you know that God exists. And then you can start worrying about exactly, is there a Trinity? Leave that for a good 5 to 10 years. And I'm going to just tell one tiny story. Yes, you're quite right. Someone said the book says no human power. I'll tell you what the difference is between human power and all of those things which come via humans. Is I can be positively affected by a room of people, none of whom are trying to help me. But there is people talk about the magic of AA. I don't believe that's a human power. I believe it's a power which is coming through humans. No one believes that the radio program coming through the radio set is originating in the radio, that there is a tiny little orchestra inside the radio. Now, how do we know this power in AA is not human power? It's very simple, because it's more than the sum of its parts. If Sally and Bobby and Susie are drunk for decades, and then you put them together, you've got no more sense than you did when you were on their own. 1 + 1 + 1 equals, it was 3 when they were separate, and it's still 3 when they're together. But when they're together, something is added to the mix which does not originate in any one of them, or else they could have done it themselves. And that is the whole point of AA. It creates a mechanism where we bring together our constituent parts, but the whole is more than the sum of those parts. And that gap between what we're able to do, if you look at all the people in this room and you look at the sum total of what we were capable of doing by the date we got clean or sober, and then if you could see what has been accomplished in the lives of all the people in this room in the past 2, 5, 10, 20, 30, 40 years of recovery in some cases, it doesn't make sense. That's not a marginal difference. That's not because there's a little bit of synergy going on, because synergy between 100 shit shows doesn't produce shit. There's something else in the mix here. If one can open one's mind to that, then anything can happen. But the thing is, one's got to decide one wants it. One's got to decide that one will be better off believing as other people do. And then you're really, really in with a chance. So, very good. So I think, Keith, that's probably, I need to go and have my tea, so I'm done. Now we're going to come back next week. The link is going to be altered. So we're going to have a room with 1 billion people allowed in. Keith will circulate the link. The link will be on the first 164. So do tell your friends who are unable to get in. They should have more success next week. So over and out from me. Thanks, Keith.